In this video, I'll be adding some new ideas into the mix regarding the previous video, as well as elaborating and correcting a few things here and there. First, a simple mistake to get out of the way, this part here.
You'll still become a type of ghost anyway. Pretty much everyone agreed that becoming an echo was a worse alternative.
These lines imply that echoes were a thing of common occurrence and knowledge, whereas the most direct instance of them being explained by looks to the moon has them described as horror stories, and would not often be heard of or heard from. Granted, Moon isn't in much of a position to test these sorts of things herself, but it does make sense. Even in our time, echoes only appear to a certain few, and only a certain few echoes can be met. The inhabitants of the world as it was before likely heard of echoes from the few that had actually experienced them, while the average person would have just had the choice or not to take their word for it. Secondly, all this stuff about void spawn. Now, I wouldn't consider that section to be a mistake, but it's best to address it again since there isn't really anything in-game that talks about it, due to being effectively an extrapolation based on environmental storytelling, and as such, it's plenty reasonable to be skeptical to the proposal. Really, it's an idea I had before Watcher, before Downpour even. It was just missing pieces. I looked at the Void, with all its relation to karma and void spawn drifting in, and figured that it must be the cause of the cycle, or at least an integral component in a system of interlocking parts, unable to spring free. And as void spawn, for how diverse and alien they can look, have quite a bit of ghost motifs in their design, arguably more than the echoes do, and we can certainly consider them ghosts, albeit this world's version of such a thing. Then Watcher came along and introduced more parts to the cosmic forces of the world, a whole opposite side of void spawn, invisible even to the enlightened eye, swimming in random directions as opposed to down, as if some of them have a non-homogeneous designation to be getting to. And now that there's an entity that so much as mentions them, they have a confirmed behavior, that of uncoordinated animals, which, with nothing to discredit the possibility of them being analogous to ghosts, would make them the disembodied qualia of random life forms. Wow. From that does come something that would theoretically upset the defined reincarnation cycle the previous video talked about, though. They eat each other, like all the time, and can even be consumed by material organisms, kind of. So, how would that fit with this? Are they just some kind of secondary ecosystem separated by a layer of reality? Well, probably, honestly, but both things could be possible at once. See, we shouldn't be too encouraged to overlay our exact concepts of things on top of what's presented in Rainworld. Most of the cosmic forces behind its formation are easily alien to us, and even the people living in it sometimes. So from that, I'd say that void spawn and ripple spawn aren't ghosts by the simple definition. It's more probable that they are carriers of qualia, benign memories with multiple levels of formlessness, representing things more than exactly being them, since they're not physical anyway. One could represent 1,000 inches of grass, while another represents the concept of a bug, and another 5 represent a single lizard. Any form of information that can be contained within a mind goes. The qualia they carry could also be passed around, too. When a ripple spawn eats another, it may simply become the new carrier of that piece of memory, and when a ripple spawn is consumed by a living organism, that could just be the cycle in action, or some other small thing is being obstructed for the time being. Though, I'd certainly say that the ripple spawn side of things is far less linear than whatever the void spawn have going on. Some of them may spend minutes in that state, others years. All that matters is that they eventually reach their destination, if they have one. And it might not even matter how long that takes, because time itself could be less relevant to their layer of reality. Either way, I'll be sticking with this possible general explanation for now. I just haven't seen any others that touch on it, and the cycle is too important of a diegetic game mechanic to completely be dumbfounded on. The mystery leaves just enough wonderful environmental storytelling that you can put the pieces into something that I think is satisfying. But if you find this possibility unsatisfying, then sorry. Anyway, now for the rots part. About Rainworld's rot described the rot to be effortless, or at least that's how the wording implied it, but that doesn't really fully make sense, does it? Sure, the rot probably doesn't have minds in the traditional sense, but if it was that simple and the rot is so attuned for the void, then what would that mean for the civilized efforts to ascend? Why does the rot seem to go to the fringe rather than be a prominent figure in the void? Sure, it bears the seemingly natural shape of ascension, but the color of its most empowered forms directly opposes the void's gold, more than the ghostly blue of echoes even. It seems like it should be inverse to the void rather than for it, so I think I have a solid answer for that. That may not necessarily even contradict what the previous video said, just emphasizes a part that previously went unspoken. You may recall in that video that the rot was said to not just be like cancer, but that it is cancer. But the second part of that very line went like this.
As in, there's a fundamental force at play that results in any kind of cancer simply becoming the rot.
As in, it wasn't always such. Say it works something like this. At first, you have something more like a biological cancer that we understand, but this is quite temporary under the mechanics of the world, as it then experiences the cycle. Whether that means the creature's own cycle or the cycle at large in some way, the void reacts to it. Normally, when non-material qualia reaches the threshold, it just cycles back, or forward, into a valid body to wake up in again. But this set of cells is incoherent with the rest. The shape of its structure defines it part of a larger creature, but it shares none of its purposes, be it heart or brain or bone, and for a moment, this emulates the previously mentioned effortlessness. This lack of any defining qualities or attachments results in it being quote-unquote already ascended. And so when it experiences the threshold of the cycle, it reaches a state deeper than normal qualia. But that's the thing, it can't be here. It doesn't make sense here, lacking the purpose of especially brain, despite supposedly being part of a creature that should have one. And the void doesn't like that. Like a chemical reaction, the exotic material gets a unique reward. Seemingly it gets the previous cycle's information cycled into it, like as you'd expect. Except the mechanics at play aren't treating it as part of its host organism. But also, it isn't being treated as its own organism either, only null and void. So the information it receives is similarly broken static, a slurry of random memories pulled from the world's qualia in general. The mass is reworked into brain tissue, existing for the purpose of housing knowledge that never belonged to it. Knowledge jumbled up and practically unreadable on the neurological scale. But that's not good enough. This neurological garbage doesn't enhance its status as a creature, so when it experiences the cycle more, it only grows. The karmic reaction only making it worse than it would have been had it just been left alone. Only bigger and bigger it gets until the memory-infested soup of brain matter bursts from the skin that contained it, splitting in that familiar X as per its relation to the void, and growing even bigger still. Also, this makes for interesting possible rot anatomy, doesn't it? Luckily, though, this resulting incarnation of non-applicable qualia is as material as everything else. Most creatures don't even seem capable of producing it in its large and embodied forms. In most cases, it's likely just hidden away in their bodies and can't really easily be the cause of their deaths, unless they're uniquely genetically or karmically ill. Ultimately, physically, when its host cripples for the last time, or in the case of it being strong enough to get up and walk away, it can only die when its resources run out. But, as we know, nothing ever truly dies here, so while the quality of its host cycles away, it goes and... what? Where should it go? How should it cycle? Reality doesn't know what to do with this stuff. So, it's cast away to the fringe, where all the other lingering memories go, building up like detritus piling against a river dam, a sickly byproduct of a self-worsening force, where it started as an overqualified example of something that could slip through, going so far in that direction so easily makes it the world's problem, until it wraps around to being something that may as well serve as a quasi-carnal representation of the very force that entangles the cycle's creatures in the first place. In a way, it serves as an outlying end on a room-wrapping spectrum, where on one side you have the creatures intelligent enough to pretend to be nothing as to allow their whole selves to slip past the threshold without returning, and on the other, you have the mass that manages to be so contradictably simple that it convinces these phenomena that it's everything. That's sort of what I'm going for here anyway. A neat little answer on how the rot in its fundamental forms is related to the void and the cycle, while also being an effectively opposite force. Not to mention, to continue running with color motifs, it makes sense for ripple spawn to also be purple too, assuming they experience an opposite of what the void spawn do. What does that mean for the wheel flowers, though? These things bear the natural mark of ascension, and they're void gold for it. Really gold, second only to the void's bond, and actually physical for it. So what is the wheelflower's deal? Well, as looks to the moon's dialogue about them goes, eating them is said to connect you to yourselves other than the one you so directly know. Strands of yours taking place not just elsewhere and when, but in memories and dreams, in worlds crafted from imagination. When you die with them, you don't lose karma. Perhaps because some alternate version of you lived in your place, or perhaps because the karma flower more easily bridged the gap between your previous strand and the one you've cycled into next, just as it grows back in a space where that other you broke away. These things are seemingly organic in nature, yet connected to the strands in a way that regular life forms simply aren't. It'd be hard to even be sure if they came about via any kind of evolution, or with how they just spontaneously appear in particular spots. Another biological incarnation of a cosmic force, we could say, perhaps more legitimately than even the rot is, vertically stretched through many strands at once, so to speak. A species whose grow beds are the places where the veils between ripples and strands grow thin. As many times as it's eaten, the flower is simply never destroyed by material means. When the creature consumes it, the creature only becomes the flower's grow bed, bringing the thinned patch of reality with it, not just in its own strand, but every other strand too, as the flower isn't something that has one location. And so finally, when the creature dies, the patch of thinness only stops moving. When the creature wakes up again, its corpse from last cycle of course never existed here, but the flower remains, for in every strand it was always the same one flower, with the same one grow bed. There is one last thing I'd like to mention though, a subtle detail about the wheel flowers still. See how they bloom with a faint aura surrounding them. In most forms of lighting it appears as a ghastly blue, a color for so long only shared vaguely with the echoes. But now, 3 solitary islands in a space of endless nothing. Not quite the void, not quite not. This space, Damon, has very little for us, but its mere existence seems unparalleled in its significance. So what of its features?
Is it part of the fringe? Doesn't seem likely due to the absolute lack of rot, though there is this other stuff here. Stuff that does sometimes show itself in the fringe and especially outer rim.
It's accessible only by entities attuned to ripple space. Wheelflowers seem to love it here, growing in groves seemingly completely naturally, which begs the question, if wheelflowers function even remotely to how they're described in this video, how thin are the veils here? Innumerable strands converge to one single location? Can you even call it a location? Where no creatures exist to experience it. Even the places it's connected to the most, shattered terrace on one side, outer rim on the other, as if to represent the purple and gold respectively. And outside of that, you can get to Damon from pretty much anywhere, like this place is some manner of true in-between, an in-between that reflects the environments around it, to the point of physically looking like shattered terrace and outer rim. What does that mean for the rest of the island, though? Is it some miniaturized reflection of the world at large? Are all these giant monoliths a natural representation of all the structures and iterators that were built in this world? Well, to get a bit more coherent for a minute, this feature is here. These. These can be called brain plants for our purposes, as their shape is used for the brain trees that show up here and there in the water campaign. They appear in a lot of places of rot, growing practically rampant anywhere deep in the fringe, which makes sense with all the other stuff about rot being brain-related. But they appear in other places too, like Five Pebbles Memory Crypt, with all these ornate boxes containing something similar, flesh organisms of some variety, which makes complete sense when you understand what they're talking about in the Memory Crypt Pearl. Ironically, one of the only places of machinery that brain plants don't seem to appear in is Five Pebbles, especially in his fringe variant. Maybe he has an updated system or something. The exact shape of developed brain plants do seem to be a natural phenomena rather than an engineered sort of thing. The cosmic forces at play really seem to like brains, don't they? No wonder rot is forced to be such. Anyway, why does Damon have so many of these? And coupled with the mysterious pulsating organs, which are probably brains too at this point, is this place alive? If it isn't rot, does that mean it contains coherent memories? Of what? Does it have thoughts? Is Daemon some echo-adjacent thing, but instead of a particular being, it's of the entire world and all of its creatures? Or the central nervous system of the world itself, removed from our concepts of physicality? Is it an incarnation of the cycle itself? Have we left the stage of the world and are thus peering down at it from the seats of the audience? Well, we won't have much of a way to be sure unless the Void Weaver says something about it. Speaking of which, you may have noticed this video also didn't mention the prince, and that's true. Still thinking it'd be better to make that its own video, and to possibly wait till the Weaver is around before talking about it. But with all this video has talked about, I'll leave you with this for now. The rot, when growing wild in a place not quite fringe, not quite not, and met with the warping touch of a ripple-attuned being, may be able to turn its endless sea of inherited memories into something useful.